So, this story is about the first time I ever lived alone. You know how it is, you spend your whole life with family, then maybe roommates in college, and there's always someone around. There's always another person's noise, another person's schedule to work around. Getting my own place it felt like the first day of the rest of my life. I was 25, the apartment was on the 7th floor of a building called The Willows, which was funny because there wasn't a single willow tree in sight, just a lot of concrete and some neatly trimmed box hedges. But it was clean, and the rental agent made a big deal about the new security cameras and the key fob entry. It felt safe, more than safe, it felt like mine. A one-bedroom with a small balcony that looked out over a parking lot, but if you craned your neck just right, you could see a sliver of the downtown skyline. To me, it was a palace. For the first 2 days, I was in a state of pure, unpackaged bliss. I assembled an IKEA bookcase all by myself, and only put one shelf in backwards. I bought a ridiculously overpriced fern and named it Robert Plant. I ate cereal for dinner, standing over the sink, just because I could. Every night, the last thing I would do was walk to the front door, listen to the heavy thunk of the deadbolt sliding into place, and feel this wave of absolute peace. This was my fortress, my sanctuary. No one could get in unless I let them in. The sheer adultness of it all was intoxicating. I was finally, truly, on my own. The first 2 nights were perfect silence, broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sigh of traffic. I slept like the dead. Then came the 3rd night. I was deep asleep, probably dreaming about something stupid like misplacing my car keys. Then, a sound, a knock on my front door. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was crisp, deliberate. My eyes snapped open in the dark. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, the screen blinding me for a second. 3:03 a.m. My first thought wasn't fear. It was pure, unadulterated annoyance. Who the hell knocks on someone's door at 3 in the morning? I figured it had to be a drunk neighbor, fumbling for the wrong apartment. It happens. I lay there, waiting for them to realize their mistake and stumble away, maybe muttering an apology to the empty hallway. The knock came again. Tap, 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 tap. A weird rhythm, not just a simple knock-knock. It was specific. Still, I chalked it up to some drunk person's idea of a joke. I didn't move. I wasn't about to engage with a stranger at this hour. After about 30 seconds of total silence, I assumed they'd given up and gone away. I rolled over, punched my pillow back into shape, and eventually fell back asleep, making a mental note to complain about it to myself in the morning. The next day, I'd honestly forgotten about it until I was leaving for work. I saw the apartment number next to mine, 714, I was 712, and wondered if it was them. But the day was busy, and the thought evaporated. That evening, I came home, made pasta, watched some trashy TV, and called my mom. She was at the nursing home, a place called Sunny Meadows. Her memory was starting to get fuzzy, like a radio station that was slowly losing its signal. Some days she was sharp as a tack, remembering the name of my 3rd grade teacher. Other days, she'd ask me 3 times if I'd eaten lunch. The call was a good one. She was lucid. We talked about her new roommate, a woman who snored, like a chainsaw cutting through a tin roof, which made us both laugh. It was a normal, comforting conversation that grounded me. Before hanging up, I told her I loved her and locked my door. The deadbolt slid home with that satisfying thunk. Fortress secure. I went to bed feeling good. The little bubble of contentment was back. Until it wasn't. I was woken up again. Not by the knock itself, but by the silence right before it, as if my subconscious knew it was coming. I looked at my phone. The glowing green numbers burned into my retinas. 3:03 a.m. On the dot. And then, the knock. Tap, 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 tap. The exact same rhythm, the exact same spacing, the exact same quiet intensity. Okay, that's when the annoyance started to curdle into something else. Unease, a little prickle of it on the back of my neck. Once as an accident, twice, at the exact same time with the exact same pattern. That's not an accident. That's a message. But what message? I didn't get out of bed this time. I just lay there, completely still, my ears straining in the dark. My heart was doing this weird little fluttery thing against my ribs. It wasn't a drunk neighbor. Drunk people are clumsy and random. This was precise. This was intentional. Is this a prank? Some juvenile thing the kids on another floor were doing? But why me? Why 3:03 a.m.? I imagined getting up, walking to the door, looking through the peephole. But the thought of seeing a pair of eyes staring back, or worse, seeing nothing at all, was enough to keep me pinned to my mattress. The silence that followed the knock was heavier this time. It felt expectant. I held my breath, listening for a footstep, a cough, a clearing of a throat, anything to prove there was a person out there. Nothing, just the hum of the fridge. I did not go back to sleep for a long time. The image of that specific time, 3:03, was stuck in my head. I kept trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it's a pipe in the wall? No, it was clearly a knock on wood. Maybe it was a sound from the apartment next door, amplified in a weird way? But it was so clearly my door. Every explanation I came up with felt thin and stupid. Eventually, sheer exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a shallow, dream-filled sleep. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about it the next day. The feeling of safety in my apartment was tarnished. It was like finding a single hair in your food at a fancy restaurant. The meal is probably fine, but you can't stop thinking about it. You can't fully enjoy it anymore. I found myself looking at my front door with suspicion. That solid piece of wood with its shiny new deadbolt no longer felt like an impenetrable barrier. It felt like a membrane. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. I tried. I put on a podcast, I drank some chamomile tea. But I was just lying there, watching the clock on my phone. 1:45, 2:17, 2:50. My body was tense, coiled like a spring. I was willing the clock to just jump past 3:03, to let me off the hook. I told myself I was being ridiculous, working myself up over nothing. A prank. It has to be a prank. 3:02. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the ceiling, my ears feeling unnaturally large, trying to catch every tiny sound in the building. 3:03. It came. Tap, 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 tap. This time, I didn't feel annoyed or even just uneasy. A wave of cold, pure fear washed over me. This was real. This was happening. I sat bolt upright in bed, my blood running cold. In the dead silence of the room, my mind, now wide awake and sharp with adrenaline, did something it hadn't done the previous nights. It didn't just hear the rhythm. It followed it. I found myself mouthing the words that fit the cadence, a ghostly echo from a childhood I thought I packed away in boxes. The rhythm wasn't just a rhythm. It was a melody, a tune. Tap, con, tap tap, Kobe, tap tap, la bela. My hands started to tremble. My throat went completely dry. It wasn't some random prank. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a song, a very specific song, a lullaby my mom used to sing to me when I had a nightmare or a fever. It was our secret song, a little tune she'd made up the rhythm to herself. She never sang it to anyone else. No one else knew it. No one. And it was happening on the other side of my door, in the middle of the night, in a city where I was supposed to be completely, blessedly alone. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room, leaving just a ringing in my ears. The world shrank down to that wooden door and the impossible knowledge of what I'd just heard. My mom's song, our song. The rhythm was so specific, a little staccato pattern she'd made up to fit the words, a family fingerprint that nobody else on earth should have. My body moved before my brain really caught up. I slid out of bed, my feet hitting the cold laminate floor without making a sound. The silence in the apartment was huge. It felt like a living thing, pressing in on all sides. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to hide under the covers like a 5-year-old and pretend it wasn't happening. But a different, more powerful part of me had to know. I had to see. I crept out of my bedroom, using the wall as a guide in the dark. The only light was a thin, pale strip coming from under the front door, the light from the hallway. It looked sickly. I didn't turn on any lamps. I didn't want them to know I was awake, that I was moving. It felt like I was playing a game with life or death stakes, and I didn't even know the rules. My heart was doing a frantic, ugly beat against my ribs, a wet thudding sound that I was sure could be heard through the door. I reached the door, my hand shaking so badly I had to steady it against the cool metal of the doorknob. I told myself to be quiet, to just breathe. In, out. Then, I leaned forward, pressing my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens warped the hallway into a long, curved tunnel under the buzzing fluorescent lights. It was exactly as it should be. The beige, vaguely stained carpet. The door to 714 across the hall. The fire extinguisher mounted on the wall down by the elevators. And nothing else. It was empty. Completely, utterly, bafflingly empty. There was no one there. No shadow, no sound of retreating footsteps, no ding of the elevator arriving or leaving. Just absolute, perfect stillness. I stayed there, glued to the peephole, for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. My eyes started to water from the strain. I was waiting for something to jump out from the side, for a door to creak open. Nothing. The silence on the other side of the door was louder than the knocking had been. The knocking was a question, but the silence was an answer I didn't understand. And that was so much worse. If I'd seen a person, even a person in a mask, I could have processed it. I could have been scared of a person. But how do you get scared of nothing? Finally, I pulled back, my breath coming in ragged little gasps. I put my ear to the door, listening. Just the hum of the building. I slowly, carefully, reached up and checked the deadbolt. It was locked. I twisted it, unlocking it and locking it again, just to hear the satisfying thunk. Thunk. Secure. Thunk. Safe. It sounded hollow. A lie. I backed away from the door like it was radioactive. I went into the living room and sank onto the couch, pulling my knees to my chest. My mind was racing, trying to build a bridge of logic over a canyon of pure fear. Okay, let's think. It has to be a prank. It's an elaborate, cruel prank. But who? I'd just moved here. I didn't know anyone in the building. My friends from my old life didn't even know my new address yet. I was going to have a housewarming thing in a few weeks. So who? Who would know that song? My mind immediately went to my mom. But that was impossible. She was at Sunny Meadows, an hour's drive away. Her memory was failing, her body was frail. She couldn't drive anymore, and the idea of her navigating a bus system, getting into a secured building, and climbing to the 7th floor at 3 in the morning just to play a prank was more than absurd. It was heartbreaking. So, who did she talk to? Nurses? Aides? Her new roommate who snored like a chainsaw? Maybe she'd mentioned the song to someone? A caretaker, maybe, and that person, for some sick reason, found out where I lived and was now using it to mess with me. But the why was a total black hole. What was the point? To scare me? Why? What did they get out of it? The questions just piled up, each one more ridiculous than the last. Maybe I was dreaming it. Maybe the stress of moving, of living alone for the first time, was making me hallucinate. It was a perfectly timed auditory hallucination, 3 nights in a row. Sure, that sounded sane. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat on the couch, watching the black windows of my apartment slowly turn gray, then pink, as the sun came up. The light helped. It always does. In the daylight, fear seems so theatrical and stupid. The apartment looked normal again. There was my fern, Robert plant, looking perfectly fine. There was my half-assembled IKEA bookshelf with its one backward shelf. It was just an apartment. I was just a 25-year-old woman who was probably overtired. But the feeling didn't entirely go away. It lingered, like the smell of smoke after a fire has been put out. All day at work, I was on edge. Every time the phone rang, I flinched. I went through the motions of my job, typing emails and sitting in meetings, but a part of my brain was still back in that dark hallway, staring through the peephole at nothing. When I got home that evening, the first thing I did was walk the length of my hallway, from the elevators to the stairwell at the far end. I was looking for, I don't know what, a hidden speaker? A tripwire? It was crazy. I felt crazy. I saw one of my neighbors, a guy from down the hall, taking out his recycling. He smiled and said, "Hey," and I just stared at him for a second too long before squeaking out a "hi." I watched him walk away, wondering, does he know? Is it you? My sanctuary had been poisoned. Now, every corner of it, every person in it, was a suspect in a crime I couldn't even define. That night was the worst yet. Sleep wasn't even an option. I made a pot of coffee at 11 p.m., which is something I never do. I decided I wouldn't be a victim this time. I wouldn't be woken up by it. I would be waiting for it. I sat in the armchair in my living room, the one that faced the front door. I turned on a single dim lamp. I had a heavy Maglite flashlight on the table next to me. I was going to confront this. If the knock came, I was going to fling the door open and see who was on the other side. My heart was pounding with a mixture of terror and determination. I watched the clock on my phone. 2:45 a.m. The building was dead quiet. 2:59 a.m. I could hear my own breathing. 3:02 a.m. I picked up the Maglite. Its metal body was cold and heavy in my sweaty palm. My gaze was fixed on the door. Any second now. Come on, you son of a bitch. Show yourself. 3:03 a.m. Nothing. The minute ticked over. 3:04 a.m. Silence. I waited. My muscles were so tense they ached. 3:05 a.m. 3:10 a.m. Still nothing. A strange, disorienting wave of relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me dizzy. It was over. Whoever it was, they'd given up. The prank was finished. Maybe they saw my light on. Maybe they got bored. I didn't care. The point was, it stopped. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 10 minutes straight. My shoulders sagged. The fear started to drain away, leaving behind a shaky exhaustion. I actually laughed a little. A wet, nervous sound. All that build-up for nothing. I felt so foolish, sitting there in the dark with a giant flashlight, ready for a fight that never came. I stood up, stretched my aching back, and decided to finally go to bed. The siege was over. My fortress was secure again. I walked into my bedroom, the relief making me feel light and floaty. I tossed the mag light onto the bed and was about to pull the curtains close. And that's when I heard it. It wasn't loud, it was crisp, deliberate, and it was coming from the wrong place. Tap, 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 tap. The sound wasn't at my front door. It was coming from the window. My bedroom window, 7 floors up. For a frozen second, my brain refused to process the sound. It was like my ears heard it, but the message got garbled on the way to my head. Because it was impossible. It was a glitch in reality, a soundbite from the wrong file playing at the wrong time. A tap on a 7th floor window doesn't happen. It's not in the rulebook of how the world works. My throat made a noise, a dry, choked little click. It was supposed to be a scream, I think, but I didn't have any air. The relief I'd felt just seconds before, that light, floaty feeling, it all curdled and dropped into my stomach like a lead weight. I stumbled backward, away from the window, my heel catching on the edge of the area rug. I didn't fall gracefully. My arms pinwheeled and I went down hard, my hip and elbow taking the brunt of the impact against the laminate floor. The pain was sharp and distant, like it was happening to someone else. My eyes were locked on the window. It was just a black rectangle against the night sky, reflecting the dim light of my bedroom. There was nothing there. Of course there was nothing there. There couldn't be. A bird? A piece of hail in a perfectly clear sky? A branch from a tree that didn't exist? My mind was scrambling, desperately trying to build a bridge of logic over this canyon of pure, unadulterated terror. But there were no materials. There was nothing to build with. The sound didn't come again. The silence that followed was worse. It was heavy, accusatory. It was the silence of a hunter waiting for its prey to move. I couldn't stay in there. I just couldn't. I scrambled to my feet, my new mission overriding every other thought. Get out of the room. I didn't run. I moved with a kind of crab-like shuffle, my back pressed against the wall, never taking my eyes off the window, as if a face might suddenly materialize in the glass. I fumbled for the doorknob behind me, my hand slick with a cold sweat I hadn't even realized was there. The brass felt shockingly cold. I twisted it, pulled the door open, slipped through the gap, and slammed it shut behind me. My hand hovered over the lock on the doorknob. Locking it felt insane. What was a little push-button lock going to do against whatever was out there, tapping on a window 7 stories up? But I did it anyway. I heard the soft click as the button sank in. It was a pathetic, useless gesture, but it was the only thing I could think of to do. I backed away from my own bedroom door like it was the entrance to a tomb. I was in my living room now. The single dim lamp I had left on earlier was still casting long, warped shadows. The room that had been my command center just minutes ago now felt huge and exposed. My fortress had been breached, not by force, but by magic, by some dark physics I didn't understand. And that was so much worse. I could understand a lock being picked. I couldn't understand gravity being optional. I didn't go back to the armchair. I went to the furthest corner of the living room, the one by the half-assembled IKEA bookshelf, and sank to the floor. I pulled my knees tight to my chest, wrapping my arms around them so hard my knuckles were white. I was trying to make myself small. If I was small enough, maybe it couldn't see me. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I sat there and listened. I was listening for anything. The sound of glass breaking. Another tap, this time on the living room window. Footsteps on the roof, which made no sense, because there were 15 more floors above me. The building was silent except for the low, familiar hum of the refrigerator. A sound that was usually comforting, a sign of normalcy, now just felt like a low growl in the dark. My brain started its frantic, useless work again. The prank theory. It had to be a prank. But how? How could anyone get to that window? A drone? Maybe. A drone with a little robotic arm to tap out my mother's secret rhythm on the glass? It sounded like a bad sci-fi movie, but it was more plausible than a man with suction cups for feet. Who would go to that much trouble? To what end? Just to watch me fall apart in the privacy of my own apartment? The thought made my skin crawl. The idea that someone was not just scaring me, but observing me, watching my fear, that was a violation of a different kind. I stayed like that for hours. I didn't move. I just sat on the floor and stared at my bedroom door, my muscles aching with tension. I watched the black of the living room windows slowly, imperceptibly, turn to a deep, bruised purple, then a sickly gray. The sun was coming up. Again, but unlike the day before, the light brought no comfort. The fear wasn't theatrical this time. It didn't feel stupid in the daylight. It felt real. It felt sticky. It had followed me out of the night and was now sitting with me in the pale morning light, a permanent, unwelcome guest. I must have dozed off at some point, a fitful, dreamless kind of sleep born of pure exhaustion, because I woke up with a crick in my neck and the taste of stale coffee in my mouth. The sun was fully up, streaming in through the windows. The apartment looked painfully normal. My fern, Robert plant, was still there. The IKEA shelf was still mocking me with its one backward plank. It was just a room, but it didn't feel like my room anymore. It felt like a stage. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here. I needed air. I needed to be somewhere else. The thought of going to work seemed both impossible and necessary. I needed the routine. I needed to be surrounded by people, by the boring, predictable rhythm of office life. But to leave, I had to walk past my bedroom. I got to my feet, my joints protesting. Every instinct told me to just leave the bedroom door closed forever. Just pretend that room didn't exist anymore. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to the bedroom door. My hand was shaking. I turned the knob. It was still locked. I pushed the button. It popped out with a soft snap, and I pushed the door open. The room was bright with morning light. It was just a bedroom. My unmade bed, the Maglite flashlight lying on the duvet where I tossed it, and the window, just a window, looking out over the city skyline, glinting in the sun. It looked completely and utterly benign. I crept over to it, my heart in my throat, and looked down. 7 stories of brick wall. A small patch of grass below. Nothing. No ropes, no scaffolding, no broken drone parts. Nothing. I was losing my mind. I had to be. An auditory hallucination, brought on by stress and caffeine. That was it. That was the only answer that didn't break the laws of physics. I got dressed on autopilot, grabbing clothes, brushing my teeth. My movements were jerky, robotic. I felt fragile, like a raw nerve. All I could think about was getting out of the apartment, out into the hallway, out of the building. I grabbed my keys and my purse from the little bowl by the entryway. My hand was on the deadbolt. This was it. Freedom. I twisted the lock, a loud, satisfying thunk, and pulled the door open. And then I froze. I just stood there, in the doorway, my entire body going cold. It wasn't a sound this time. It was an object. On the drab, standard-issue brown doormat, placed dead center, was a small, plastic butterfly barrette. It wasn't just any barrette. I knew it instantly. My breath hitched. It was a pale, pearly pink. The color faded from years of what should have been sunlight and chlorine from the community pool. The left wing had a tiny, almost invisible chip on the bottom edge where I dropped it on the pavement 100 times. It was mine, but it couldn't be. I hadn't seen this barrette in over a decade. My mom had bought it for me at Eclair's when I was in 7th grade. I was obsessed with it. I wore it every single day. And then, one day at summer camp, it was gone. I probably lost it somewhere in the woods during a disastrous game of capture the flag. I was devastated. I remember crying for a solid week, convinced my life was over. My mom had to sit me down and explain that sometimes we lose things we love, and it's okay to be sad about it. It became one of those core childhood memories, a little lesson wrapped in a piece of cheap plastic. And now it was here, on my doormat, on the 7th floor of a building I'd moved into 3 weeks ago. My mind just stopped working. The drone theory, the prank theory, the auditory hallucination theory, they all evaporated in an instant. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hallucination. This was a message. Hallucinations don't leave physical evidence. Drones don't time travel to my middle school summer camp to retrieve lost keepsakes. I bent down slowly, my knees cracking. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The plastic felt smooth and cool, and impossibly real. I turned it over in my palm. The chip was there, the faded color. It was real. A wave of nausea washed over me, so intense I had to put a hand against the doorframe to steady myself. This was a different kind of fear. The knocking, the tapping, that was scary. That was about invasion. This was about knowledge. The person doing this didn't just know where I lived. They knew the song my mother sang only to me. And they knew about a cheap plastic beret I cried over when I was 12. They hadn't just invaded my apartment. They had invaded my memories. They had reached back into my past and plucked out one of the most private, tender-hearted moments of my childhood and placed it on my doorstep as a threat. I backed into my apartment, slamming the door shut and throwing the deadbolt. The sound echoed in the sudden, terrifying silence. I slid down the door, my back pressed against the wood, until I was sitting on the floor. I was still clutching the beret in my hand. It felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. The song, the beret, both of them were tangled up in memories of my mom. Our secret song, a lullaby she invented, a stupid butterfly clip she bought me, and the talk we had after I lost it. They were our things. A cold, horrifying thought began to form in my mind. A single, terrible line connecting 2 points I didn't want to connect. He didn't get these things from me. I looked at my phone, lying on the entryway table. My fingers felt numb, clumsy. But I knew what I had to do. The questions were too big now, too terrifying. This wasn't about a noise in the night anymore. This was about my life. My past. My mother. I had to call her. I had to call Mom. Right now. My back was pressed hard against the door, the wood cool through my thin t-shirt. I was still on the floor, the butterfly beret digging a sharp plastic line into my palm. It was real. That was the part my brain kept getting stuck on, like a skipping record. It was a real, physical object from a past he shouldn't have had access to. A memory made solid, and that meant the song wasn't just a coincidence, wasn't just some half-remembered tune he'd overheard somewhere. It was a key. He was using my own life against me. The song, the beret, the two facts circled each other in my mind, and in the dead center was my mom. He wasn't getting this from me. He couldn't be. Not these things. These were the sealed-off parts of my childhood, the quiet little rooms only she and I had ever been in. My phone was on the entryway table, maybe 5 feet away. It felt like a mile. I had to move. I couldn't just sit here, backed into a corner of my own apartment, waiting for the next impossible thing to happen. I pushed myself up, my legs weak and shaky. My knees cracked in protest. I kept my back to the wall, shuffling sideways toward the table, my eyes locked on the front door as if it might suddenly burst open. It was ridiculous. He had my lost beret. What was a deadbolt going to do against someone who could apparently teleport objects through time and space? I grabbed the phone. My hand was slick with sweat and I almost dropped it. The screen lit up with my own terrified face as the wallpaper. I swiped, my thumb smearing the glass. I didn't have the nursing home's number saved. Who saves the number to the place you hope your parent never has to go? I had to look it up online. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. I misspelled Pleasant Meadows twice before the search result finally came up. I pressed the call icon and held the phone to my ear. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. I had to sound normal. I had to sound like a daughter calling to check in, not like a woman who was slowly losing her mind. The phone rang once, twice. Pleasant Meadows Assisted Living, this is Brenda speaking. How may I help you? The voice was cheerful, too cheerful. It was the kind of practiced, customer service cheerfulness that felt completely alien to the ice-cold terror seeping into my bones. Hi, yes. I'd like to speak to one of your residents, please. Sarah Miller. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out thin and reedy. Of course. Let me just see if she's in her room. One moment, there was a click, and then I was listening to a tinny, instrumental version of What a Wonderful World. It was supposed to be soothing, I guess, but it felt like the soundtrack to a horror movie, the calm before the killer shows up. Each plink of the piano keys felt like a second stretching into an eternity. I paced the length of my small living room, the phone pressed so hard to my ear it hurt. What was I even going to ask? Hey Mom, did you happen to tell a complete stranger about the secret lullaby you used to sing to me? And while you were at it, did you mention that I lost a pink butterfly beret at summer camp in 2008? It sounded insane. Hi there, I have her on the line for you now. Brenda's voice cut back in, impossibly bright. And then, I heard her. Hello? My mom's voice was foggy, distant, like she was talking through a thick blanket. Mom, it's me. It's Oh, Annie. There was a pause. I could hear the television on in the background of her room, the sound of a game show host shouting about a new car. Are you coming for bingo today? The nice man said he'd save me a card. My heart sank. It was one of her bad days. The days where time got jumbled, where I was 12 and 30 at the same time. No, Mom, I'm at my apartment. I just called to say hi, to see how you're doing. I walked over to the window and looked out. The city was just waking up. Cars were starting to move on the street below. Everything looked so normal. It made the strangeness inside my apartment feel even more concentrated, more potent. I'm fine, dear. The food here it's food. That was her standard line. Even through the fog, her dry humor peeked through. It made me want to cry with relief. For a second, just a split second, this felt like a normal phone call. Mom, I have a weird question for you, I said, trying to make it sound like a fun little game. Do you remember that song you used to sing to me when I couldn't sleep? The one about the stork? I called it a stork. I don't know why. It felt safer, like if I said the wrong bird it would break whatever spell was happening. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The game show host was screaming about a bonus round. I thought I'd lost her. I thought she'd drifted off again. Not a stork, silly, she said, and her voice was suddenly sharp. It was clear as a bell, the fog completely gone. It was the voice of my mom from 10 years ago, the one who would help me with my homework and tell me to clean my room. It was a white stork, Conco Bela Bela, the one that flies over the rice paddies at night. My blood went cold. Right, I whispered. My throat felt tight. That's our song, Annie, she continued, her voice filled with a conspiratorial warmth that terrified me. It's our secret. You don't go telling people our song, you hear me? It's just for you and me. I won't, Mom, I promise, I said, my voice cracking. It was true, I never had, which meant, Mom, who do you talk to there? At the home? Oh, everyone. The nurses are nice, mostly. Brenda at the front desk is a little loud. My roommate snores. She was drifting again. No, I mean, you said a man saved you a card for bingo. Is there anyone you talk to a lot? Anyone new? I was fishing, praying she wouldn't mention him, but knowing she would. Oh, her voice brightened again. You mean the nice maintenance man? Yes, he's such a dear, a very sweet young man. He comes in to fix things, the leaky faucet, the rattling grate on the air conditioner. He always stops to chat. A maintenance man. My mind flashed to the friendly, unremarkable guy who'd fixed my garbage disposal last month. The one I'd barely even looked at. What do you talk about, Mom? Oh, you know, old stories. He loves hearing about the old days. He's very interested in our family. He says he doesn't have much of his own, you see. The innocence in her voice was a knife in my gut. He's always asking me about you, Annie. He says you sound like a wonderful daughter. We talked all about you just yesterday. My breath hitched. My hand, still clutching the barrette, went numb. He was pumping her for information. My confused, sweet, vulnerable mother. He was mining her memories for weapons to use against me. The lullaby, the barrette. What else had she told him? What other private piece of my life had she unknowingly handed over? Mom, I said, my voice low and urgent. Mom, what's his name? The maintenance man. What's his name? She laughed, a light, airy sound. Oh, I don't know, honey. My memory isn't what it used to be. But he's right here, he just brought me my water. You can ask him yourself. The world stopped. He's right here. My vision tunneled. The apartment around me disappeared. There was only the phone and the voice on the other end. I heard a faint shuffling sound, and my mother's voice became distant, muffled. She wants to know your name, she was saying, no longer talking into the phone. She was talking to someone in the room with her. Mom? I choked out. Mom, WHO is in the room with you? Get away from him. But my shouting was swallowed by a single, quiet sound from my own apartment. Click. It wasn't a loud noise. It was small, a dry, final little sound. It came from the entryway, right by the front door, where the circuit breaker box was. And instantly, everything went dead. The lamp in the corner winked out. The digital clock on the microwave disappeared. The low, constant hum of the refrigerator, a sound so ubiquitous I never even noticed it until it was gone, died. The phone in my hand went silent. The call was cut. The screen wouldn't turn on. The entire apartment was plunged into a thick, suffocating darkness and an even more suffocating silence. It was absolute, a blackness so complete it felt like a physical weight. My other senses screamed to life to compensate. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the frantic thumping of my heart. The air felt cold on my skin. The smell of the dust motes in the carpets suddenly seemed overwhelming. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room for what felt like an hour. It was probably 10 seconds. My eyes strained, trying to find a shape, a sliver of light from under the door, a reflection from a window. There was nothing, just pure, unadulterated black. He had cut my power. The thought wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. This wasn't a random outage. It happened the exact second I realized he was with my mother. The exact second I was about to find out who he was. It was a message, a response. He was listening, and the only way he could have cut the power to my specific unit, from the breaker box inside my own apartment, was if he was here. Right now, the silence in the apartment wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, it was charged, it had a texture, a presence. I wasn't alone in the dark. He wasn't at the nursing home anymore. He wasn't on the phone. He was here. I stood there in the dark for a long time. You'd think that with a man supposedly in your apartment, you'd scream or run or do something. But my body didn't get the memo. It just shut down, all systems offline. It was the same kind of paralysis you feel in a dream when you're trying to run but your legs are made of lead. The only thing moving was my heart, which was trying to hammer its way out of my chest, and the blood roaring in my ears. The sound was so loud it was almost a comfort, a distraction from the new, heavier silence of the apartment. The blackness was total, not just dark, but a physical presence. It was the kind underscore of dark you get deep in a cave, where your eyes can stay open for an hour and they'll never adjust because there is absolutely zero light to catch. It pressed in on my skin. I could feel it. I held my hand up in front of my face and there was no difference. Nothing, and in that vast, empty blackness, my mind started playing tricks on me. Every tiny creak of the building settling was him. The faint rumble of a truck passing on the street 7 floors below was him. The sound of my own blood in my ears was him. He was everywhere and nowhere. My imagination, which used to be a fun place full of daydreams, had transformed into a torture chamber, projecting his shape into every corner of the smothering darkness. He was by the TV. He was behind the couch. He was standing right behind me. I swear I could feel his breath on my neck. I jerked my head around, a stupid, useless gesture in the pitch black, my breath catching in a dry sob. I wasn't alone. That was the one, single, solitary fact I could hold on to. He was here. He'd cut the power from the inside. How long had he been here? The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Had he been hiding in the closet when I got home from work? Was he under my bed while I was on the phone with my mother? Had he been watching me, in the dark, this whole time? The idea was so violating, so 100 times worse than a simple break-in, that I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. He hadn't just invaded my home, he'd invaded my hours of private, oblivious safety. He had turned my sanctuary into his theater. And then, I felt it. A shift in the air. Time seemed to slow down and thicken, like it was congealing around a specific moment. I don't know how I knew. There was no clock, no light. But I knew, with a certainty that was as unshakable as my own name, that it was 3:03 a.m. The knock came a split second later. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the creepy, exploratory tap from the nights before. This was a pounding, boom, boom boom, boom boom, the same rhythm, the lullaby, but now it was angry. The wood of the front door groaned with each impact. He wasn't asking for my attention anymore, he was demanding it. This was the sound of patience worn thin, the sound of a game about to end. The force of it vibrated through the floorboards, up my legs, and settled deep in my bones. I clapped my hands over my mouth to stifle a scream. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. My whole body was shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. It was the end. He was going to break the door down and that was going to be it. I squeezed my eyes shut, thinking this was the last sound I would ever hear. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that rushed back in was worse than the pounding. It was a listening silence. A waiting silence. I stood there, a statue carved from fear, every muscle tensed, waiting for the splintering crash of the door giving way. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard a new sound. It was faint at first, and from a completely different direction. It came from the living room, from the sliding glass door that led to my small balcony. Scrape. CHK scrape. It was a metallic sound. The sound of metal grating against metal. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the sound of the wind rattling the frame. It was methodical, rhythmic. He had stopped trying to get through the reinforced front door and had moved to the balcony. To the cheap, standard-issue lock that I never even thought to check. Of course he knew about it. He was the maintenance man. He knew every weak point in this entire building. He knew every flimsy lock, every rattling window. He knew my apartment better than I did. That single, scraping sound broke the spell of my paralysis. My brain, which had shut down, rebooted with a single, screaming command, run. It wasn't a thought, it was pure animal instinct. He wasn't coming through the front door. He was coming through the back. And my living room, my kitchen, my whole open-plan apartment was a kill box. There was only one place to go. My feet moved without my permission. I didn't know where anything was in the dark, but muscle memory took over. My hands shot out, bumping into the edge of the kitchen counter. My fingers scrambled across the smooth granite, searching. They brushed past the toaster, the coffee maker, and then they found it. The wooden block of kitchen knives. My hand closed around the smallest one, the little paring knife I used to cut apples. Its plastic handle felt flimsy and pathetic. It was a joke, but it was better than nothing. Clutching the little knife, I stumbled out of the kitchen area, my bare feet slapping softly on the floor. I felt my way along the wall, my shoulder brushing against the plaster. 2 more steps, turn right. The door was here somewhere. My outstretched hand found the cool, smooth surface of the bathroom door. My fingers fumbled for the knob, found it, turned it. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me. The darkness in here was even more complete, if that was possible. I listened, holding my breath. I couldn't hear the scraping anymore. My hand searched for the lock on the doorknob. It was one of those little push-button ones. I pushed it. Click. The sound was pathetically small, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I was locked in. I was safe, for a second. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the cool tile of the floor, my back pressed against the wood. I brought my knees up to my chest, making myself as small as possible. The paring knife was still in my hand, my knuckles white. And then I remembered my phone. It was dead. The landline was dead, but 911. Doesn't 911 work on a dead cell phone as long as there's a battery? I didn't know. I had to try. My other hand was shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out of my back pocket. The screen was black, unresponsive. I pressed the power button again and again. Nothing. It was completely, utterly dead. He hadn't just cut the power to the apartment. He must have used an EMP or something, some device to kill electronics. The thought was so outlandish, so beyond the scope of a normal criminal, that it just cemented the fact that this person was not sane. There was no way to call for help. No one was coming. No one even knew this was happening. I was in a locked concrete box, 7 stories up, with a monster. And then I heard it. SSSSSHHHLICK. It was the sound of the balcony door, sliding open. It was a smooth, oiled sound. Unobstructed. He was inside. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to stone. Every sound was magnified 1,000 times in the tiny, tiled bathroom. I could hear the soft, deliberate tread of his shoes on the living room carpet. Heavy, a man's tread, sure of himself. He wasn't sneaking. He was strolling. He was taking his time. Thump, thump, thump. He was walking through the living room. Past my couch. Past my bookshelves. A floorboard creaked near the entryway to the small hallway that led to my bedroom and the bathroom. My heart seized. He was in the hallway. He was coming for the bedroom first. I heard him pause. I pictured him in my mind, standing in the dark, listening. Just like me, maybe he thought I was hiding under the bed. Please go to the bedroom, I prayed silently, the words a frantic, desperate chant in my head. Please go to the bedroom. The footsteps started again, but they didn't go towards the bedroom door. They came towards me. Thump, thump. He stopped. He was right outside. He was standing maybe 2 feet away from me, separated only by a cheap, hollow core door. I could feel his presence. The air on my side of the door felt colder, heavier. I was so close I imagined I could smell the grease and rust from his maintenance work, the stale sweat of his obsession. I held the paring knife out in front of me, the blade trembling, pointing at the center of the door. My throat was so tight I couldn't have screamed if I wanted to. The silence stretched for an eternity. My entire world had been reduced to this one small, black room and the silent man on the other side of the door. And then, he knocked. Not a pound, not a bang, it was quiet, intimate, right against the thin wood, perfectly level with my head. Cock, 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 cock. The lullaby, the secret song. He was playing his game again. He was reminding me, this isn't random, this is for you, and just for you and me. A single, horrified sob escaped my lips, loud in the suffocating quiet. It was the only sound he needed. I heard a faint, metallic click, the sound of the push-button lock being turned from the outside with a pin or a tool. It was a sound I'd heard my mom make 100 times when I'd accidentally locked myself in as a kid. He knew how to do that, too. My eyes were locked on the brass doorknob. Slowly, deliberately, it began to turn. The brass doorknob finished its slow, deliberate turn with a final, soft click. It was like the end of a countdown. My life had been reduced to the space between that click and whatever came next. I saw the door begin to move, a thin black line of hallway darkness appearing in the jamb. This was it. I was going to die in my own bathroom, clutching a knife I used for apples. My eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the impact, for his hands on me. But the next sound wasn't his. Police, get on the fucking ground. Now. The voice was a roar, a shockwave that tore through the apartment's thick silence. It didn't come from the hallway. It came from the living room. It was followed instantly by a crash, the sound of my cheap IKEA coffee table splintering. Then a heavy thud, a grunt of pain, and the frantic, scuffling sound of a struggle on the carpet. It was total chaos. Beams of light from powerful flashlights sliced through the darkness, strobing under the bathroom door, dancing across the tiles in a mad, disjointed rhythm. I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain had blue screened. It was trying to process two completely opposite realities at once. The one where I was about to be murdered, and this new one, this loud, violent, impossible rescue. The sounds of the fight were ugly and real. Grunts, the sickening thwack of something hitting flesh, more shouting. It went on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then, it stopped. The sudden silence was replaced by the sound of heavy breathing and the clean, metallic ratchet of handcuffs clicking shut. I was still on the floor, my back pressed to the door, the useless little knife held out in front of me. My whole body was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. A new voice, this one calmer, female, spoke from just outside the door. Her voice was muffled by the wood, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Ma'am, my name is Officer Evans. We're with the city police. The suspect is in custody. Are you in the bathroom? Are you okay? I tried to answer, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. I swallowed, my throat feeling like it was full of sand. Yes, I managed to whisper. I'm here. Okay, ma'am. He's secured. It's over. Can you unlock the door for us? Unlock the door. Right. My hand, the one not holding the knife, went to the little push-button lock. My fingers felt like clumsy, frozen sausages. I fumbled with it for a second before I could push it in to release the lock. The little pop it made was deafening. I stayed there, on the floor, unable to will my legs to move. Ma'am, Anne, we know your name is Anne. We need you to open the door. I looked down at the paring knife still clutched in my hand. It looked ridiculous. I let it go. It clattered onto the tile with a small, pathetic noise. Using the door for support, I pulled myself up. My legs were trembling, threatening to give out from under me. I wrapped my shaking hand around the doorknob, the same doorknob that had been turning from the other side seconds ago, and pulled the door open. The hallway was filled with two huge cops in tactical vests. Past them, in my living room, the lights were on. The main breaker had just been flipped back on. And there, on my living room floor, face down with his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, was the maintenance man. It was him, the guy who'd fixed my leaky sink last month. Mark, I think his name was. The quiet, middle-aged guy with kind eyes and a polite smile who had told me to have a nice day. Seeing him there, his face pressed into my carpet, a trickle of blood coming from his lip, didn't make any sense. My brain just refused to connect this person, this monster from my nightmares, with the harmless handyman I barely even registered. Officer Evans, the woman who had spoken to me, gently put a hand on my arm. It's okay, you're safe now. She guided me past the scene, towards my couch. Another officer was already there, holding a thick wool blanket. He wrapped it around my shoulders. I sank onto the cushions, pulling the blanket tight around me, but it didn't stop the shaking. The apartment smelled of sweat and something else, something metallic and sharp. Adrenaline. I just stared at the man on the floor. How? I started, my voice still a rasp. How did you know? My phone, it was dead. The power was out. Officer Evans knelt down in front of me. Her expression was calm and professional, but her eyes were kind. You called 911. We got the call at 3:04 a.m. There was no one on the line, just an open connection for about 2 seconds. But it was long enough for us to get a location ping. When the call cut out, we dispatched a car immediately. You must have hit the emergency dial in your pocket. It happens. Sometimes a phone with a dead battery has just enough juice left for one last emergency signal. You got incredibly lucky. I didn't remember doing that. In the dark, in my panic, my fumbling fingers must have done it without me even realizing. I had saved myself by accident. The thought was so absurd I almost laughed, but it came out as a strangled sob. They got Mark to his feet and led him out. He never looked at me. He just kept his head down, his expression completely blank, like he was a guy being led away for a parking ticket, not for breaking into a woman's apartment to terrorize her. After he was gone, the apartment felt both safer and 100 times more violated. Officer Evans stayed with me while her partner, a big guy named Davies, started a preliminary search of the place. He was methodical, quiet. He checked the balcony door, which was hanging open slightly, the lock clearly jimmied. He looked at the front door, which had deep, angry dents in the wood. He really wanted to get in, Davies said, his voice flat. He came back into the living room holding the man's jacket, the one he must have taken off when he got inside. We found this in your hallway. He patted it down, pulling out a wallet and a set of keys. Then his hand went into an inside pocket and he paused. He pulled out a small, rectangular object. It was a shoebox, a regular cardboard shoebox for a pair of men's sneakers. And, Officer Evans said, her voice gentle but firm, we need to know what we're dealing with here. Do you mind if we look in this? I just nodded, numb. I couldn't imagine what could be in there that was any worse than what had already happened. I was wrong. So wrong. Davies set the box on the floor in front of me. He lifted the lid. The first thing I saw were the pictures. There must have been 100 of them. They were all of me. Me coming home from work, keys in my hand. Me in my pajamas, drinking coffee by the window. Me watching TV on the couch. Me asleep in my bed, my face slack, vulnerable. He must have taken that one from the hallway. Just standing there, in the dark, watching me. The pictures were printed on cheap photo paper, chronicling weeks, maybe months, of my life. He hadn't just invaded my home tonight, he had been living in it through his camera lens for ages. My sanctuary hadn't just been turned into his theater, it had been his screening room, too. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to swallow hard to keep from being sick. But the pictures weren't the worst part. Underneath the pile of photos was a single object. It was an old-school cassette tape in a clear plastic case. The kind I hadn't seen in at least 15 years. Tucked into the case was a small, white paper label, the kind you'd feed through a typewriter. On it, in neat, blocky, handwritten letters, were 3 words. A.N., Mom's Lullaby. I stared at it. I think my heart actually stopped beating for a second. The air left my lungs. The knocking, the rhythm, the song that was our secret. How could he possibly know? Officer Evans saw the look on my face. She exchanged a glance with Davies, a look that was grim and heavy. She picked up the tape, holding it like it was a piece of radioactive waste. "And," she said, her voice very quiet, "your mother, she's at the St. Jude's care home, right?" I nodded again, unable to speak. "The man we just arrested, Mark Peterson, he works maintenance for this building. But according to his file, he also has a part-time job. He does maintenance and janitorial work at a few places around the city to make extra money." She took a deep breath. "One of those places is St. Jude's." The pieces clicked into place with an awful, sickening finality. The room tilted. My mother, her memory was fading, she got confused. She loved to talk, to tell stories about the old days, about me as a little girl. She would have seen his friendly, polite face, and she wouldn't have seen any danger at all. He must have just talked to her, asked her about her daughter. And she, in her lonely, muddled state, would have told him everything. She would have told him about our secret song, the special one she only ever sang to me. He had listened, and he had recorded it. He had taken the single purest, most loving memory of my childhood and he had twisted it. He'd weaponized it into a tool of psychological torture. The knowledge was a physical blow. It was worse than the pounding on the door, worse than the turning knob. It was a violation so deep it felt like he had reached back in time and tainted my entire life. I thought that was the bottom. I thought the horror couldn't possibly go any deeper. That's not all, Davies said, his voice low. He reached back into the shoebox. He pulled out more tapes. 5, 6, 7 of them. He laid them out in a neat row on the floor. Each one had the same typewritten style label. Each one had a name. Chloe, Fear of Clowns. Jessica, First Kiss. Megan, the dog's name. Sarah, nickname. Next to each tape in the box was a small, pathetic little trophy. Next to Jessica's tape was a tube of cheap, cherry-flavored lip balm. Next to Chloe's was a small plastic button, the kind from a child's coat. Next to Sarah's tape was a single, silver hoop earring. They were all women. Women he had apparently learned about, studied, and terrorized using their own private histories against them. I wasn't the first. I stared at the row of cassette tapes, at the names of strangers whose deepest fears and most tender memories were sitting on my living room floor. The relief I had felt just minutes before, the simple, animal joy of being alive, evaporated completely. It was replaced by an icy, sprawling dread. I was the one who called the police. I was the lucky one. I looked at the tapes, at the names of Chloe and Jessica and Megan and Sarah, and a single, chilling question echoed in the silent, wrecked space of my apartment. Were they lucky, too?